To have a text and below the text a couple of buttons, we now need a invisible, a layout widget. And there we can use the column widget. Column, as the name suggests, is there to render widgets in a column, because the difference to text and so on is that this has a children named argument, which actually takes a list of widgets. Now there are a couple of new things. This thing here between the angle brackets, that's new, and the square brackets here are also new. What does this all mean? Let's start with the square brackets. Dart, like many other programming languages, has the concept of lists. Thus far we learned about strings, about integers, doubles, and objects, and everything is an object in the end. Now lists are another type of data. A list is basically a group of data, so you can have a list of strings. For example, here we could add a variable questions, and that could now be a list of text questions, like what is your favorite color? By the way, if you would want to write what's here, and you use single quotes to enclose the string, then this single quote would quit the string, which is an error, and you can escape this by adding a backward slash in front of this. Now what happens is that this single quote here is not treated as a quote that ends the string, but instead as the quote character that should be part of the string. So that backward slash in front of it achieves that. So now we would have a question, what's your favorite color? And also, what's your favorite animal, for example? Let's also add a trailing comma here. And now questions actually would be a list of string data. Now the idea behind lists is simply that we can group related data together, because in so many scenarios of programming, but also in real life actually, you work with lists of data. You have on your phone, on your real phone, if we take a real life example, you have a list of contacts. Your friends, that's a list of persons, a list of people. And therefore, lists are also something that exists in programming, and basically in any programming language you can find, and of course also in Dart therefore. Lists are created with square brackets. That's also what I did up here. I created it with square brackets, and therefore lists are also created down there, where we have a list of widgets. And that's the angle bracket widget thing. This is a so-called generic type, and it's a little annotation, which we could also drop here because of type inference. This tells Dart that this list here will hold a list of widgets, because a list can of course hold anything. This, for example, is a list of strings. If I hover over questions, we see that Dart was able to automatically infer this list, and then again this angle bracket thing, but here with string. A generic type is basically an annotation which you can have on some types that allow Dart to understand that this is not just a list, but a list of a specific data type here, for example. It's the same thing down there. This is a list of widgets. Now, because of type inference, we can remove that as soon as we start adding widgets here. And there I would want to have my text widget with the question, and I'll add some real text soon, and below that a couple of buttons. Now there are different kinds of buttons in Flutter. One of them is the raised button, which is a button with a background color and a little hover effect. Now the raised button here is again a widget which we create by instantiating our class here, and it typically has a child, which is basically the content inside of the button. That could be an image, that could be an icon, but often it's also just some text, so the text which is displayed on the button. Again, this is a widget, not just some string. The child here is a widget instead, and therefore here we could have answer 1, and then I can copy that line and add it again, so that we also have answer 2 and maybe also answer 3. Now each button, besides having a child, also needs an onPressed argument, and onPressed will be a function that should be executed when this button is well pressed. For the moment, since we haven't really learned how to wire that up, let's add null here. Null is a special value in Dart. It basically means nothing. The difference to void is that void is a type. So here we say the type of data main returns is empty, it's nothing. And null is not a type, but a concrete value. Just like 1 is a value, the number 1, or like this here is a value, null is a value, which says nothing. But we need to add that to avoid errors. So here I add onPressed to all my buttons, and for all buttons I then add null. And with that, again, I hit my code formatting shortcut so that this gets formatted in a bit of a nicer way. And again, if we add trailing commas like here after null in my first button, then this gets formatted in a bit of a more readable way. So now I added my column widget, which has a couple of child widgets, where we have the text widget and then the raised buttons. And if we save that, now we see our text up here, and then we see the 3 buttons, and they are currently all disabled because onPressed is null. And that means if we press this button right now, nothing happens, and Flutter automatically detects this and then disables the button, which sometimes can be nice if you have a user input form where you gather the email address and the password of the user. Then you would want to disable the button as long as nothing valid has been entered. Here, however, of course, I want to enable them. And for that, we have to understand how we wire up the button here to some function that does something, or how we make sure that something happens when the button is tapped. Of course, we can also improve the styling and how this is laid out here on the screen, but we'll do this in a second step. For now, it was important to understand how we can have more than one widget next to each other with the help of column for ordering widgets from top to bottom. If you would want to have them sit next to each other left to right, you would have used row instead. But we'll see column and row and all these other invisible and visible widgets throughout the course.